Welcome to our latest explainer. Today, we're going to dive into something so massive, so completely fundamental to our modern world, that frankly, almost all of us are entirely blind to it. We absolutely take the miraculous safety of modern global maritime trade completely for granted. I mean, you know how it goes. We order our goods, they cross oceans, and they arrive safely. But the truth is, the open ocean is a wild place, and the system keeping it all safe, it's actually a fascinating historical anomaly. To understand just how wild this system really is, picture this number, $1.2 billion. Imagine a massive container ship, like the Everlot, sailing roughly 200 nautical miles off the coast of India. On board are nearly 21,000 shipping containers with a combined cargo value of over $1 billion. And yet, this massive floating fortune literally has no defenses. Zero. It has a small, multinational civilian crew who are specifically trained not to put themselves in harm's way. And it just casually sails past non-allied nations with absolute, undeniable safety. So that brings up the giant question staring us in the face right now. Why doesn't anyone steal this? Seriously, any single local navy from any of the countries this ship sails past could easily commandeer this slow, unarmed jackpot. But they don't. Instead, these foreign navies actively protect it. They would deploy their own resources to help this ship if it ran into trouble, completely for free. Why? Well, to answer that, we actually have to rewind the clock. Which brings us to Act 1, the era of cannons. See, for almost all of maritime history, the open ocean was a wildly violent survival of the fittest environment where ships literally had to fight for their own safety. If you were sailing through these exact same waterways back in the 1750s, your merchant vessel was heavily laden with cannons, and you traveled in massive armed convoys. Compare that to today's unescorted civilian cruise. Back then, spices from Asia were considered massive luxury items, specifically because their exorbitant prices were factoring in the very real risk of death, theft, and piracy. Because state navies weren't really out there protecting the deep ocean, massive corporate entities had to step up and do it themselves. Take the Dutch East India Company, or the VOC. At its peak, get this, they boasted 57,000 employees, 150 merchant ships, 40 dedicated warships, and 10,000 soldiers. They had to operate as these massive pseudo-navies, fielding larger military operations than most actual countries could at the time, just to ensure their goods actually made it home. In governments, they actively encouraged this violent, organized chaos through something called privateering. You could get a formal letter of marque from your monarch. It was basically a legal hall pass authorizing your private vessel to capture enemy merchant ships for profit. The crown got to deny their adversaries trade revenue to fund entirely separate wars back home, and you got to get rich without being hanged as a common pirate. A real win-win for that, right? But that volatile setup didn't last forever, leading us to Act 2, the profit of peace. This brutal, militarized system worked for a surprisingly long time, but it certainly wasn't conducive to building the interconnected global economy we have today. Eventually, it just collapsed, and a highly counterintuitive new era began. By the late 1700s, massive companies like the VOC collapsed under their own weight. They just overstretched trying to hold all those trade routes. Then, in 1815, the end of the Napoleonic Wars left Great Britain as the undisputed naval superpower of the planet. And instead of locking down these coveted trade routes for themselves, Britain did something totally unexpected. They opened them up. They ushered in an era known as Pax Britannica, actively policing the seas so everyone could trade safely. Now, enforcing global peace was astonishingly expensive. 1.8%. That is the massive portion of Britain's entire national income that was consumed at its peak by just the West Africa Squadron alone. This was the fleet dedicated to policing the Atlantic, suppressing piracy, and shutting down the transatlantic slave trade. Britain was footing a staggering bill, so the rest of the world could essentially free ride on their naval protection. So why do it? Well, it wasn't just altruism. It was driven by brilliant economic logic. Think of it as a three-step engine. Step 1, Britain pays to protect global shipping. Because global shipping explodes in volume thanks to that newfound safety, we move to Step 2. Britain captures the booming global insurance market at places like Lloyd's of London, which naturally leads to Step 3. Britain becomes the world's undisputed financial hub. They profited massively off the sheer volume of global commerce flowing through their systems. And this matched an intellectual shift happening at the exact same time. Economic thinkers like Adam Smith and David Ricardo were championing ideas like specialization and comparative advantage. They completely rejected the old mercantilist idea of violently hoarding gold and spices. It was simply more profitable to collect the financial and insurance fees at the center of a thriving global ecosystem than it was to try and monopolize a stagnant, dangerous one. Fast forward to the 20th century, and we arrive at Act 3. America takes the helm. As the new century arrived, the world order violently fractured once again, leading to the passing of the torch from London to a new global center. World War I severely strained British finances, and World War II tragically destroyed immense amounts of European infrastructure. But the United States? They emerged with their massive industrial capacity almost entirely intact. In 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement officially cemented U.S. financial dominance. America took over the exact same role of global ocean police, allowing them to safely export American goods globally while boosting New York's surging financial markets. This American-led era formalized the rules of the ocean under UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. This is a remarkable piece of international cooperation that guarantees innocent passage. Basically, it means any foreign vessel can legally transit through another country's territorial waters peacefully. This is the exact legal architecture that allows our defenseless Taiwanese ship from the very beginning of this explainer to just sail past India without asking anyone for permission. But again, rules written on paper only matter if there is a massive navy ready to enforce them, right? $292 billion. That is the staggering annual budget of the U.S. Navy today. To maintain these paper protections across every major ocean and at every checkpoint on Earth, the U.S. has to project military strength at an enormous ongoing cost. Which brings us to the present day. Act 4, the cracks in the hull. The specific economic incentives that kept this miraculous system running for over 200 years, they are rapidly disappearing right before our eyes. Today, 87% of global merchandise trade happens entirely outside the United States. Only 13% actually involves the U.S. So, looking at this neutrally, you can kind of see why American voters and politicians are reasonably questioning the whole arrangement. Why blow up the national debt to fund a massive global navy that primarily protects trade routes enriching other countries' economies? And the situation gets even more complex when you look at who actually builds the ships. China now accounts for over 50% of global shipbuilding output by tonnage, with South Korea and Japan taking up another 40%. The rest of the world combined is under 10%. This means the U.S. is currently paying to protect commercial vessels that are overwhelmingly built by and benefiting its primary industrial competitor, which leads us to some serious modern warning signs. The symptoms of this breakdown are already here. The U.S. economy itself has shifted significantly from needing physical exports to dominating tech and finance. We've seen over 190 commercial vessels targeted in the Red Sea with diminished naval deterrence. And recently, Indonesia even publicly floated the idea of taxing the Malacca Strait, which is one of the busiest global trade choke points. Strategically positioned nations are starting to do the math. We are actively transitioning from an era of guaranteed free passage to, well, potentially a leaderless ocean. If the U.S. does step back from its role as the ultimate guarantor of the open seas, there is simply no obvious country stepping forward to take its place. China is vastly more interested in regional control, and Europe simply lacks the spare resources and coordination to attempt it. So, what does this actually mean for us? Let's wrap up with our conclusion, the true cost to you. Let's bring all these massive geopolitical shifts out of the stratosphere and directly down to your wallet and your daily life. The immediate unavoidable math looks like a domino effect. Reduced naval protection directly leads to spiking insurance premiums, which is exactly what we are seeing today. Unsafe shipping lanes force global supply chains to stop sprawling across the world, and instead they have to regionalize. And ultimately, the end of free navigation equals significantly higher consumer prices for absolutely everything you buy. Less safety destroys the incredibly cheap economics of international shipping. Think about it like this. A completely mundane 3-cent plastic widget can be stamped out in Vietnam, shipped all the way across the ocean to Mexico for assembly, and then warehoused in New Jersey. That incredibly convoluted global journey is only economically possible because moving goods over the open ocean barely registers as a per-unit cost. Our entire modern lifestyle relies on supply chains that will physically stop making sense if shipping costs rise even modestly. So, as we look at a world where the financial incentives for policing the oceans are fading, and the historical anomaly of 200 years of total maritime peace faces unprecedented cracks, we're left with a massive question. Is the era of cheap global shipping finally over? Thank you so much for joining me on this Explainer today. I highly encourage you to keep this fragile system in the back of your mind the next time you casually click free shipping.